Scientology could be called, well, you could call it a religion of religions.
Howdy everybody, and welcome to the Indie Scientology podcast with your host Andy Nolch. These are closed-door secret briefings about vital information about Scientology and the world, information that you need to know. And I think that you can understand this if you aren't a Scientologist, because that's the way I present them. Because I'm talking about a high level in Scientology. OT8 in this briefing, it's part 6 now of me talking about OT8 because there's so much to say. But it relates to the world and what's going on. And really it isn't heavily Scientology related necessarily, because if you're not a Scientologist and you just pick up a Scientology book, there's heaps of words you won't understand, and you don't know. You have to do it for years before you can understand it. And then people, even after years, still don't really understand it. They might think they understand it, but they don't. But anyway, this is more political stuff. It's explaining the political situation of Earth for OT8, and the way I present it will be in a way that you'll still understand it. You should probably go to part 1 if you really want to understand this OT8, and then watch each part as I go along. And there's been a lot of time between these parts because I've learnt so much. And today's briefing might be the last one on OT8, and then the last briefing for the podcast, because I'm finishing it and moving on to other stuff. But I wouldn't be surprised if I don't finish it in this briefing. But basically I'll continue reading the OT8 document. There's not much more to go, and I'm going to explain it. And then after that I'm going to talk about OT8 and what it really means. Because this document is just very hard to understand. If you're not a Scientologist, you're not going to understand it. You're not going to understand it. And that's why I've made this briefing series. If you're a Scientologist, you're probably not going to understand it. I mean, that's how hard this document is. You read it and you're like, what? What's he trying to say? What idea? Well, I'm going to tell you what the idea is he's trying to explain. And in a nutshell, it's kind of like the Lord of the Rings story, basically, where you've got Sauron, the Dark Lord, that's trying to invade Middle-earth in Lord of the Rings. And he's taken over the minds of those Dark Horsemen, and he's created an army, and this whole war's starting between the good guys and the evil force, because this Sauron's trying to take it over from another dimension. Hubbard's basically saying that's what's going on here on Earth. And it's not that unusual idea, because warfare always exists between species, between races, between animals, between aliens, between planets. People are always competing for things. So when you've got other dimensions, other realms besides this universe that we're in, well, it makes sense that someone else from some other universe would try and get into this one and want to use it for whatever purpose. Just the same as America wants to get into Ukraine and Russia wants to get into Ukraine. They've got their own agendas and they're looking after their own groups and they're infiltrating and all this sort of stuff. But it's a really big leap for people to handle, that there's interdimensional warfare, because they don't believe there's other dimensions. But if you take substances where you can open up other realms, you know that there's other places. Like if you've taken ayahuasca, you know that there's some other place, like that this isn't all that there is, and there's far more to life, and it's very bizarre, and it's like really deep down the rabbit hole. But if you're a dumbed down atheist that's been brainwashed by the government and been brainwashed by just the physical universe, and all you think is just the physical things exist, and you're not into like higher science. You think you're into science. You're like one of these losers that wears t-shirts that say science is rocks, and like you think you're a scientist like Chris Shelton, but you're really just a shit scientist, because the real top scientists, all the way going back to the ancient Greeks, they were into other dimensions and real deep stuff, and they knew that people could move objects with their mind. They knew that it seems that reincarnation's real. They knew that all this wild stuff. Top level science is magical. Anyway, it's only these dumbed down leftist scientists that are not believing in these other realms. But anyway, these other realms exist. And yeah, there seems to be warfare among the other realms, and I don't even necessarily believe what Hubbard's saying in OT8, like the whole Lord of the Rings idea. But I mean, I'm not going to say it's ridiculous, not at all. I mean, totally, it could be true, you know, and it just makes total sense. I mean, I've been looking into the alien subject, and there's absolutely alien warfare going on, and we're caught up in it. So anyway, with this briefing, I'll continue with it. But I'm delivering this briefing from like a sort of lookout point on a mountain in Mexico. This is a town called San Jose del Pacifico, and it's known for its magic mushrooms, and it's like a little touristy sort of hot spot, but it's really small town. It's up in the mountains, and I'm on this little like viewing platform. It's kind of like a little cubby house or something, and I thought it'd be cool to make a video here and let you see the background. I'll pick the camera up and show you the town, which is basically below what you're viewing. So we're like up here above the town's just down there, but it's really hard setting the camera to the right angle and everything, so I'll leave it, and you might hear some Mexican music in the background of this recording as well. So anyway, speaking of the alien things I was just saying, where we were up to in the briefing, Hubbard just mentioned the point that aliens are among us, and that's a little interesting bomb that he drops to say that statement. Hubbard knew that aliens were around. He knew that the government was covering it up. Aliens are around, and the reason they're not recognized that much, but they are recognized, you have to just look into the ufology, it's a whole subject, is because the aliens look like us, because Earth was colonized by aliens. We're not native to this Earth. In fact, I don't think really anything is. I think that aliens invented trees and animals and stuff and brought them here, and that's why you'll notice that the theory of evolution is very faulty. It just explains how animals change like in size and beak size and stuff like that, but you don't get like a lion to a fish, a human to like a giraffe or something like that. These sort of big changes do not happen. You just get little changes, like the color of the fur and the size of the jaw. But like a classic example is looking at dogs and cats. Dogs have changed because of the way evolution works and how you can, and humans breeding. But if you look at dogs, they've changed a lot from what they sort of originally were, which were wolves. But they're still dogs. They still have a certain way of behaving. They're still dogs. Same with cats. Cats have changed from the lion to the tiger to the little house cat. But you can see how they're all still the same creature. They're just different. That's the only change that occurs in evolution. That's the only truth. It's called microevolution. Things might slightly evolve. But macroevolution isn't true. So what really happened is the aliens brought stuff here, and that's what happened. So anyway, so Hubbard drops this bomb here that there are aliens walking among us. And I think he's almost suggesting that they are from the Markab alien force, and they are here, I guess, as part of their takeover mission. And I don't even really believe in the Markabs, but I believe there are aliens here taking over, so it depends on what words you want to use. But that's normal behavior, because what we've got is, I'm just telling you this because I've researched ufology and I know a lot about aliens. So, they're aliens in other realms, and they're competing for Earth. And apparently right now there's like 3 aliens trying to take over Earth, basically. So It's the same as like America. There would be Chinese intelligence in America, there would be Russian intelligence in America, and then there'll be like American intelligence, and they'll be like competing on that, for that territory. Do you know what I mean? So aliens, for whatever reason, are fighting against other aliens for this territory, and that they work undercover. Because that's how you do. That's how you get prepared for an invasion. Is you do all this. You do lots of intelligence activities. It's not like in Ukraine where finally it's like all-out warfare. Ukraine for years before that was all intelligence, shifty stuff going on. Shifty, sneaky, shifty. And if you can't achieve what you want to achieve, then eventually it just goes. Finally, they bring in the troops and just has an all-out war. And that's the last resort. Earth is like Ukraine, let's say in 2007. Just shifty. All these shifty things going on. Intelligence agents working, trying to achieve certain ends. And that's what's going on here. And that's why there's agents, that's why there's aliens among us. And some of them look just like us, but also other ones that look different to us, they can use cloaking and like shape-shifting. They're aliens, they're really advanced, so they've got activity, they've got the ability, maybe they put on a bodysuit and they click a button and it makes them look like a chicken, it makes them look like a human, makes them look like a duck. That's what you can have with advanced technology. I wouldn't surprise me if our CIA has this technology these days, because we're so advanced. So anyway, I just wanted to go over that statement that Hubbard mentioned, but that's just another point. It's just like, whoa, what a deep thing to say, there's aliens among us. And it's like, yeah. And people who have no idea what's going on, who haven't studied ufology for hours and hours and hours and listened to the stories and actually visited people who have claimed to have been abducted, which is what you need to do to really find out that it's true. Or haven't even sat by a mountain and looked for... There are UFO hotspots. Like there's a mountain just outside of Mexico City that's like a UFO base basically, and people see UFOs going from it. You know, do these people who say UFOs are silly? They tend to be lefties. Do they go and visit that mountain and try and watch it? They don't. They just say it's ridiculous and they watch one or two little crappy videos and then that's it. The truth is that they're tricked by the governments who are covering up the UFO issue, because the governments are using intelligence agents and putting out disinfo, and they're just getting brainwashed and tricked by it. Just the same is, I bet you that same person who's like, I'm just thinking of the Chris Shelton type person. He's a person who hates Scientology, if you don't know, but he's just a typical leftist. He would be tricked by Ukraine propaganda, war propaganda. You can just tell. I mean, he would have no idea what's really going on in Ukraine, and he would have a wrong opinion about the war, and he's just an idiot. He's just not that bright. Anyway, I'll continue with this briefing. Without the biogenetic meddling of those who stand outside time, who cannot yet directly influence our world and must work through others. It's very Lord of the Rings, isn't it? Because Sauron, he can't just stand there and walk around in the Middle Earth. He has to do it through the other people because he can't materialize in form or something. You've got to watch Lord of the Rings to understand what Hubbard's talking about. And Lord of the Rings was written by like a top Mason and someone who's quite knowledgeable on Earth history, and it contains lots of truth put into a fiction story. Anyway, and also Lord of the Rings has the ring, which is almost like the eye of the Illuminati. And it's kind of interesting because, you know, they keep on going to the eye, and then like in the Lord of the Rings, the ring or whatever, the red ring, it makes you wonder, because the Illuminati has this idea of the eye and the light. It does make you wonder if the Illuminati are forwarding Sauron's agenda. And in Hubbard's language, he would say the Markab agenda, I guess, or these interdimensional beings' agenda. Because the Illuminati are like these, it's like a cult, and they're spiritual, and they're knowledgeable, and they're just awake, they know what the hell's going on. But they could be channeling data from Sauron, and they could be getting tricked by this alien force of enlightenment, and they could be, I guess, acting like the horsemen in the Lord of the Rings, the Black Horsemen in the Lord of the Rings. And they could be helping to enslave mankind. And people believe that. People believe in 1776 when the Illuminati started, but that's the evil Illuminati. There's so much to this story. The Illuminati was around before 1776. And there are multiple Illuminatis. But the evil Illuminati that's got a bad reputation amongst conspiracy theorists and stuff like that, they really could be evil, and they really could be forwarding Sauron's agenda. And there's a lot of evidence indicating that. And they started in 1776 by Adam Weishaupt. And I think that's how you pronounce it. And this is where I almost want to get into genetics and racist. Well, I mean, I don't know if it's racist, but it's just stating facts. I don't even know if I want to open up that whole can of worms on this briefing, but Adam Weishaupt was of a certain race. Yeah. I don't know what that is, but I haven't heard them do that in this town yet, but it's some big loudspeaker or something. It'd be funny if they're announcing something like there's a COVID outbreak in the town, everyone locked down. Anyway, I'll continue. Hopefully it's not too noisy. But it seems that there's two, and this is from my research, and Alex Jones has said it as well. He goes, no, there was two Illuminatis. Like it got infiltrated, and that's what you would do, wouldn't you? If you had a secret cult that was running Earth, and you wanted to invade Earth, and you were this Sauron guy, the Markabs or whatever, you would go to that cult and try and invade it and infiltrate it. And it seems like that's what happened in 1776. Now, and that's why I think since then, you see things heading more and more in the direction of communism. And you really notice it in the 20th century, really. In the 20th century, that's when it really sort of starts to kick in. But communism is this Sauron police state takeover, and people who think with the Sauron mindset, like those horsemen, they're the lefties. They've got the lefty mindset, and that's why if you look into people like Chris Shelton, just those typical leftists, those people at like pro-refugee rallies, those people at pro-COVID rallies that are for COVID, and those atheists and stuff, those classic skeptical atheists, they all seem to be connected by their minds, and they all seem to be forwarding the same agenda. Like, I've learned how to spot these sort of people with these minds, and like, let's say with the Ukraine war, I can just predict what they're going to decide with that. I can just go, let's say they've got a YouTube channel or something, I can go, look, I bet you this person will be forwarding the lie about the war. And then you go and you look it up and you're like, yeah, they're forwarding the lie about the war. Like, they're idiots. And instead of sitting back and saying stuff like, oh, I don't know if reincarnation exists, or, I don't really know what's going on with the war, it's deep and complex. You go and you look at them and they're like, reincarnation's bullshit. You can't move objects with your mind. I've never seen any evidence for it. Aliens, absolute bullshit. And they're just like, whoa. And John Attack, who's a Scientology hater, here's another classic example. You just know that he's going to be ending up supporting evil. And then there are other people who aren't under this mind control, and you just like go and check out their stuff, and you can tell that they might be wrong about some things here and there or something, but you can just tell they're not always just completely wrong. Like, you can just tell they're pretty intelligent, and they tend to be right about things. Like, they'll say stuff like, yeah, but what about the biolabs in Ukraine? And they'll go, well, I don't know who to support or not. But they just, anyway, it's just, I've noticed that there are certain people in this world who just gravitate towards false data, evil and wrongness, and they're the lefties, and they've got the leftist mind. And that's what I think this briefing is talking about, where these Sauron's taken over their mind and they're forwarding the evil agenda of the enslavement of humankind. And you got someone like Hubbard who's dodgy and crazy and is wrong about certain things, but at the end he doesn't forward their agenda. He says stuff like, hey, what's going on with Pearl Harbor or something like that, and he mentions, hey, aliens, and he mentions, like, his data just isn't blatantly like completely wrong and heading in the wrong direction. Like, he sends you in a direction where it's of the goodness, right? So what's going on is complex in this world because it's a big war and battleground. But anyway, like I was saying, the Illuminati, this Adam Weishaupt Illuminati, could be forwarding this Sauron agenda. And I love how, I swear they never use these loudspeakers and this music and all this sort of stuff, but when I pull out the camera, they just start pumping music and make announcements. But I'm sure it'll be alright. You'll probably like the interesting background noise. But now we're going to get into the racial part that I want to talk about. It appears that leftism comes in the DNA. And that is what Hubbard's saying in this, because he's saying that they created an implant that affects the DNA, and then from there on the person's under mind control of Sauron, basically the force of evil. Right? Now, and Hubbard says that this DNA gets passed on to the children and passed on to children. As time goes on, more and more people become leftists. Right? So these people like Chris Shelton and these, I call them degenerates, because degenerate means like you got bad DNA pretty much. They're increasing in number, and I agree with what Hubbard's saying, where it's getting more and more and more, and he's saying you need to do OT8 in order to correct it. I don't believe that, but well, I guess I sort of believe, because thoughts can create reality, and it can pop you into whatever alternative universe you want. So if it's an alternative universe where just doing OT8 and thinking in your head, because it's possible to magically change things, changes the DNA and corrects it so that, Sauron can't take over people's minds, then that's possible. So, yeah. But what I'm saying is, I don't know, I wouldn't be surprised if someone did OT8 and it kind of didn't work. But it all depends on your belief, I think, because thoughts can create reality, and the whole of Scientology depends on that. That's why if you don't believe thoughts can create reality, then you're not going to believe any of Scientology or OT8 or anything. And that's why these atheists, these leftists, these materialists think that way. Will think that Scientology is absolute bullshit because they don't believe in magical thinking. Now, about the DNA thing, it appears that Earth's DNA is corrupted, and there's a lot of degeneracy, and this degeneracy gets passed on, and it's increasing more, and so more people are becoming leftists, and that's why we're getting more and more of a police state getting set up and a control system and everything. And so it's quite interesting because there's something I've got to tell you that's really deep that you're probably already aware of, but there's a certain race here on Earth that tends to have this leftist DNA, this materialistic DNA, and there's heaps of evidence indicating what I'm saying here. You can read books by Henry Ford, there's Henry Ford. I mean, you can read Hitler's book. You can read one by David Duke. He's got a good book that covers the whole issue. But basically, there are a certain race who, a large percentage of them has this leftist DNA, right? And whenever you've got them in a certain area, like a city like New York, LA, Melbourne, London, Moscow, back during the Russian Revolution times, they end up bringing in communist police states. It's literally in their DNA. In fact, when the Russian Revolution occurred, it wasn't in 1917, it wasn't a Russian Revolution, okay? It was a certain ethnic minority taking over Russia, right? I'm not even going to mention the name of the ethnic minority. And anyone who gets angry at this, you're being a stupid leftist and you're pissing me off. Because all I'm saying is that there's a large percentage of them that are leftist. I hate the white race as well, okay? There are heaps of freaking lefties that are white, okay? You can see them in the suburbs of Melbourne, okay? Those inner city suburbs and in those inner city places in San Francisco. Right? But I'm just saying there's more of them, right? And that they also have higher IQs. So guess what happens when you have higher IQ? You're more able to do things, you're more able to rise up the ranks in corporations and governments and institute your lefty bullcrap. You see what I mean? So, I mean, this is what's annoying, but one of the tactics they use is anyone who talks about them or suggests anything about this race, then suddenly it's like, oh, he hates them all, or he's suggesting that they should all get killed, or something like that, right? And it's like, no, I just acknowledge that there's degeneracy in the DNA code, and the DNA determines behavior, which it does. You'll see leftists have leftist kids and stuff like that. Anyway, so this certain race, which Adam Weishaupt was a part of, tend to forward communist police states. So what does that indicate? Does that indicate that they've got this DNA, they've got this Sauron mind control going on? I think so. I mean, yeah, so basically, and of course not all of them have this. Of course not all of them. It might only be 20% of them that have the DNA. Now, of the Europeans, maybe only 7% of them have the DNA. But because they've got the higher IQ, and they've got the 20%, you notice them more. And when they have the Russian Revolution, which wasn't a Russian Revolution, I think you know what revolution it was. It's the word that you can't say. That revolution, 8 out of 10 of them were of this race, right? And they created the whole communist thing, right? They were forwarding these crazy communist police states. Now, it ended up getting, I guess, dismantled and stuffing up and failing. And probably good Americans were trying to infiltrate Russia and trying to shut it all down and stuff. But it's always been in the Western countries while Russia went completely crazy. So Russia got taken over by communism, and it went full-blown communism. The West was slowly getting communism, slowly, because there's so much resistance from people like me. Because what would I be doing if I was around 70 years ago? I'll be like saying, hey, what the hell's going on with this communist bullshit, you know? And I'll be resisting it, and people like me would be politicians, and it took ages for them to turn the West communist. And in the meanwhile, Russia fixed itself up and managed to get rid of a lot of communism. The West continued on, and as the 20th century went on, it went more and more communist. And then now with COVID, it's like, wow, full-blown communism. Like in Australia, New Zealand, Canada, you can see them just unleash proper Russian-style communism. And Russia had gone the other way. It started fixing itself up. But people with this leftist mindset keep on instituting communism and crap. And anyway, Hubbard's saying, you know, you just do this implant and you're going to reverse it. But anyway, if anyone's interested in the this conspiracy, anywhere where you've got a large percentage of people of this certain race, it's going to be more communist, right? And that's all I'm saying. You know what I mean? Like Melbourne, okay, California. Melbourne had gold in the 1800s, so it attracted people who were interested in that industry, people of that race. A lot of them were in that industry. They moved to Melbourne, right? Same as California. The same time, I'm not joking, California had a gold rush. It attracted them to California. Same race attracted them. What do you get in California? What do you get in Melbourne? A lot of leftist socialist ideas. What do you get when you go into Los Angeles? You pick up a magazine on the shelf and you get a lot of anti-Trump leftist bullcrap. You don't get that in Kansas City. You don't get that as much in Texas. Why? Because there isn't a huge hotbed of community of these sort of people. Anyway, what I'm trying to tell you is that your political beliefs come through your DNA, and certain people's DNA tends to support communist police states and censorship and that whole 1984 idea. Right? And so, anyway, Hubbard's saying here that Earth's DNA is getting infiltrated by these interdimensional thingos and we need to fix it up. Now, he's also talking here about the Christian thing, because he's talking about people basically being mind controlled by Christianity. Guess which race Jesus was from. Guess which race you know. You know which race he was from. So has he got that DNA? I suggest so. And this is where the briefing is going to separate and go into a whole theory where people might go, what the hell? What are you saying, Andy? You're talking about the communists. You're talking about lefties, atheist lefties. And then Hubbard's talking about Christianity in this briefing, right? They're separate things. Christianity's always been warring communism. No. Here's the big secret of it all. Christianity is the first introduction of communist type ideas onto Earth. Christianity is collectivism. Christians, although they will disagree with those skeptical atheists, at the end of the day, they forward the same alien agenda, the same Sauron agenda. It's like Sauron sat back and said, let's create this and let's create this. And they're two t-shirts, one's red, one's blue, so they look totally different. And not only that, one of them's made of sheepskin and one of them's made of cotton. They look physically different, superficially different. But essentially, those t-shirts are going to operate in a way that supports my infiltration of Earth. That's Christianity and communism. And there's a connection between Christianity and communism. And they're both forwarding the same agenda. Now, now stick with me on this, because I know that this is going to shock you. I was going to do this in the next briefing. I was going to finish reading this, but obviously somehow I've gone into it. And I'm happy that stupid background noise has stopped. Mexico is quite a noisy place. They like their loud music. Anyway, I've opened up the can of worms. I've got dot points here saying how Christianity and communism are the same thing. There are some things by Hitler you can read, like private talks, where he mentions how the badness of Christianity, and lots of top Freemasons know this, and Illuminatis know this, the good people in the Illuminati. Christianity is illogical. Well, anyway, but before I go into all these points, because I've got them written on my phone, I wrote down all the points, because I'm like, you're going to have your mind blown. What are you saying Christianity and communism are the same thing? These people the Hubbard are talking about on this briefing, right, who are under alien mind control, they are the leftists. They are the standard average Christians. They're both under the alien mind control. They're both under Sauron mind control. They look different superficially, but at the end of the day, they forward materialistic agenda. They forward the materialistic agenda and the socialism, basically. Now, I'm going to go start reading out these points now, because I know I might have totally ARC broken you and going, what the hell? No, it's Christianity that's good, blah, 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 versing the communism. But here, I'll explain to you how they're the same, and I've got to read out all the points. Communism, firstly, is pretty much a religion. You praise the government and following the government like it's Big Brother. Christians praise Jesus and the church and God, and they follow it. So they're both obsessed with getting their reality and their control from a certain group. See how they're similar? Next thing. Okay, now, communists are actually quite racist and weirdly racist, racially obsessed. They do stuff like, they'll see a black person and they'll go, oh, poor black person, here, I'll give you a university degree for free. That's offensive and racist. If I was a black person, I'd say, get fucked. Fuck you. That's an offensive thing. They do this reverse thing where they try and help the other races, and it's actually insulting them, and they treat them special and they segregate them. They cause segregation. They put safe spaces in, and even though the communists, this is how communists are so crazy. They're just the craziest people. They're forwarding an agenda. They don't even know it, subconscious. Basically, they're racist. They honestly are racist, whereas actually, right-wingers like me, we're not as racist. We acknowledge that there's differences, but we're not as like weirdly mean about it. Now, Christians, hold on a second. Christians do a similar thing where maybe this is a bad point, but anyway, Christians do a similar thing where they rail against pagans, right? And by the way, I'm not talking about casual Christians who don't even really follow it, like Alex Jones and stuff like that middle America Christians. They're not really Christians. I'm talking about actual Christians, okay? These Christians that are like crazy, like the communists. So, they label things as pagan. So my whole thing is all pagan. They would look at me and go, oh my God, Andy's so pagan. He's just pagan. They'll look at Freemason and go, oh, pagan. They'll look at witches and people who are into psychic ability and go, oh, it's all pagan. And they attack it. Well, because other races are pagan, right? Like native Mexicans and native Australians, they're not Christian. They're following their paganism. Paganism means not Christian. They essentially are racist because they'll say, no, those Mexicans are wrong. No, those Aboriginal Australians with their ancient history thing, they're wrong. no, those psychics are wrong. And so they're essentially, it brings in racists, so that they're, in a way, these hardcore Christians are racist in the same way that the commies are racist. Right? This isn't a really strong point, but it is true. It is true when you look at it. Right? Whereas someone like me, I'll look at those cultures and say, yeah, go and see what data is in them and see what you can learn. And then, you know, I'm sure some of it's right, some of it's wrong, but I'm not like, oh, don't do that. No, don't do that. No, don't do an ayahuasca ceremony, an ancient South American ceremony. No, don't do that. No, don't do I don't know, some like Mexican sauna thing. Or like, oh, no. It's all like, it's pay. Oh, don't go to that psychic. No. Oh, no. Like, it's all just like, anyway, I'm going off topic, but that's one point. I agree, it's not a massively strong point, but there is truth to that. There is actually truth to that. Like, and when Christians spread out of Europe and conquered other cultures, that they were just totally racist. Like, they were just like, no, these people, fuck them, and like, they're going to be Christian and they're going to force their Christianity. So Christianity brings about racism. It does. In the same way that communism, trying to create everyone equal and giving black people university degrees and treating them special, it creates racism as well. It's just crazy. Anyway. Now, the Christian belief system is retarded. It doesn't make sense. It's illogical. The Bible's full of mistranslations, faults. It's like Chinese whispers. You know, when kids play Chinese whispers and you come back with a sentence that's like, what the hell? That's what Christianity is. If you look into their beliefs, it's a retarded, illogical belief system. What's communism? It's a retarded economic, political belief system. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't work. It's retarded. Okay, so that's how they're similar. Another point. And illogical people gravitate towards them. That's another thing as well. If you're illogical, you're going to gravitate towards communism or Christianity. I mean, obviously communism's worse. Okay, it's further down the scale. Christianity is more like socialism. Communism's more like communism, basically. It's more extreme. But Christianity lays the groundwork because Christianity has ideas that, like, the poor need to be looked after and stuff like that, and it makes society softer and men softer, and it like, if you have a country and you want to take it over by communism, I would put Christianity in at the start and get them used to these softer ideas, like, yeah, you need to help welfare and help the poor and blah, 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 blah. And then you would start ratcheting it up and bringing in more of a police state, more and more communism, and it introduces it and gets them ready for it. Oh, here's another point that's interesting. Communists and Christians both hate paganism, because what's paganism? It's just funky cults and spiritualism and stuff like that, right? And of course, the atheistic communists hate it and think it's ridiculous. And the Christians hate it as well. So that's another point where they're similar. So hopefully I'm starting to change your mind here. There's so many points here. Christianity stifles science because it's got this weird moral ideas and stuff like that that are just too excessive. Like, it's wrong to work on genetic sciences and stuff like that. And it forces science to go underground and be secret, and that's actually why a lot of governmental stuff that they're doing is secretive, like how they can clone people and stuff like that. They've got amazing technology. They can make people, the Navy can make people who can breathe underwater. So they can grow people with DNA that's special so that they can grow and operate underwater, right? But they couldn't publicly announce all these DNA inventions and stuff like that, because people in the church and Christianity would freak out. So what does Christianity do? It stifles innovation and advancement and stuff like that. And that's the same thing that communism does. Communism somehow corrupts science and just makes it all retarded, like they're trying to say we've got same genders and stuff like that, and it just has a direct corrupting of science and stifles scientific advancement, communism. That's the same as Christianity. It stifles scientific advancement, and that's why it has to go underground into the Illuminati and secret things and all this sort of stuff to get anywhere. You know what I mean? So yeah. Okay, now so people, let's say you take people and they're free and they're doing communism, right? The reason I'm giving you all these reasons is because you need to understand Hubbard's viewpoint and why he thinks the way he thinks. If I can't convince you of the connection between communism and Christianity, then you're just not going to believe Hubbard. You're just going to be like, what the hell? And you're not going to see it. Now, you got people who are free, and when they're free, people just do capitalism, like in this little town I'm talking about. It's just how we operate. When there's no big, by the way, there's like no police in this town, and there's no government. It's got so little government here. It's just far away and isolated, and you don't need police, and it's all just a scam anyway. Anyway, so when people are just free, they just do capitalism. It's just how you do. Like, oh yeah, I want some eggs. Okay, well here's a t-shirt, and people just trade, and then people switch little bits of gold instead, and it's just how it happens. It's just natural. Communism comes in and lays down all these rules, like, boom, like you've got to do this and you've got to do that, and they say, oh, there's a problem with this fine system. You go blah 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 blah, and the communists come in, they lay down all these rules, and they fuck up the economy. Right? It's similar to how Christianity comes in and lays in all these rules in people's lives, right? So you've got people who are just pagans, and they're doing this, and they're living like me, and they're just being pagans, and then you just, yeah, blah, 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 blah. And then in comes Christianity and says, no, you can't do that. You can't do that. Here's all these rules, blah, 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 blah. And they label down all these rules, and suddenly things are all serious, and suddenly people are scared of committing sins. In the same way in a communist system, people are scared of breaking the law. And you have lawyers and police to discipline people in the communist system. But in the Christian system, you have priests and parents. They're like, oh, you can't do this and you can't do that, and it's all control freak, and you're worried about getting caught. And anyway, do you see how they're the same? Do you see how they're both control systems? Right? And they could have, this Sauron guy could have the whole world split, which it sort of did in the 60s, where like one part of the world was all communist police state, the other part of the world was all taken over by America and England, basically. But at the end of the day, if they were all under Christianity, right, they're still controlled. They've got the whole populace controlled. Do you see what I mean? As long as they're sticking to that. Right. So what I'm trying to say is that Sauron can use a blue t-shirt and a red t-shirt, and they look different, but they still support the same agenda, which is control. That's what it's all about, taking over Earth. And you could just do it. Imagine if there's some country you want to take over, and you think, all right, let's go and we'll get the guys to go in there and take over using this tactic. Let's have a plan B. Let's have them go over and take over using this completely different tactic. But at the end of the day, I control growth groups, and everyone's under a control system, and they don't fucking know it. And we'll get those two groups fighting each other, right? And whoever wins, it doesn't matter. I control both sides. Do you see what I mean? We're thinking warfare here. That's what this interdimensional takeover is. So another thing is that when people's lives turn crap, they tend to sometimes get real obsessed with Jesus and Christianity. The same with communism. When people's lives turn crap, they get obsessed with communism. They turn to the government for help. And you'll see them at lefty protests and stuff like that. they're there and they're messed up, and they're obsessed with lefty ideas and stuff like that. And so it's a similar thing. If you've got a person who's got a good life and they're cool and they're relaxed and they're calm, and their life hasn't turned shit, they don't get obsessed with Christianity. They don't get obsessed with communism. You see what I mean? They're just like cool. And if they do go to church and it's just part of their culture, it's very casual. It's like, oh, okay, cool. And they sing a little song and they're not really into it. You know what I mean? But the person who's really into it, really quotes the Bible, really knows the things, is like, you know. And it's the same as someone who's casual, who might go to a little bit of a leftist rally or whatever because they think, oh yeah, it's okay, you know, support the refugees a little bit. They're not really into it. But the people who are really into it, who are really getting up there and speaking on the leftist loudspeakers, blah, 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 you know, they've gone through shit. So it's interesting how when people go through shitness, their lives are shit, they turn to Christianity or communism. So in Christianity, poverty is a virtue. That's just like communism. It's like it's cool to be poor. It's cool to be average. Jesus wasn't into money. Do you see what I mean? And that's the same as the communists. But what I'm trying to say is that look at Jesus' life. He was a bit of a hippie communist. Okay? And also he didn't want, I think, criminals punished. That's this if we go by the stories of it right. Like he said something like, don't punish criminals or whatever, or don't throw stones at them or something like that. That's a leftist idea of letting people off from justice. And also Jesus showed signs of being into gender equality, which is a communist idea. I think he was, well, I don't know about that, but anyway, it seems if you look into Jesus' life, if you look at him, he was a lefty, right? Now, women, if you look at them, they tend to believe in socialism and communism more. And guess what they also tend to believe in more? Christianity. You'll notice that women gravitate towards Christianity. What are women noticing in Christianity that's attracting them towards it? What are women noticing in socialism that's attracting them towards it? Control system. Women are cool with being nice and protected by Big Brother because it's why they gravitate towards men, because it's like a man is in control and looks after them and protects them. It's a similar sort of thing like that. But you'll see that why are women gravitating towards Christianity? You'll see it. You'll see it amongst women. You'll see more of them being involved in Christianity. And you'll notice that the husbands are busy working. And if you talk to the husbands, they'll say something like, of course the world wasn't built in 7 days. And they'll just go along with it, the men. But the men aren't really interested in in Christianity. And it's the same with communism. Communism's rife with women. If you go to any refugee protest or whatever, you'll see heaps of women. Communism is very feministic. So basically Christianity is feministic and communism is feministic, basically. And why are they gravitating towards these two different things? You know what I mean? Because there's similarities there. Remember, I'm giving you all the reasons why Christianity and communism are actually the same thing, just with superficial different labels. Now, one of the reasons also, I think, is that communism is illogical. And it's just an illogical belief system, and Christianity is an illogical belief system. And women can get tricked easily by illogical belief systems because they're naturally not as logical. Science isn't so much their thing. They go by more feeling and stuff like that. And like I was saying, the protector thing and stuff like that. And that's absolute proof. I can prove that. I mean, all the top scientists have been men. You can take a whole bunch of men and who are better at maths, for example, and you'll find that men on average are better at maths. It's just a lot. Hubbard said this as well in one of his books about men being more logical. It's just a fact about life. It's how men think. Women, it's not their role to think as logically. But that's partially why they will gravitate to those different things, because they're both illogical. Christians kind of don't want to take responsibility for their life. Like I said, they like to have the big brother thing. They like to have the God and the Jesus protecting them and everything, and that's the reason for the way things are. And they don't like to look at their own life and go, wow, I've been creating this, or it's my fault why that happened. And they don't stand up and go, I'm responsible for all this, I'm tough, I caused all this and stuff like that. Christians don't like doing that. It's the same as communists. They tend to just turn to Big Brother and the government and stuff like that to solve problems, and they pass blame onto other things instead of looking at themselves. So Christians will like blame the devil or God for the way things are. Communists will blame the government and other people and capitalists and stuff. They're both pushing blame away. Christians don't like blasphemy. Like, they have a problem with certain words. Like, oh, you can't say that. Oh, that's outrageous. And it's the same with communists. They're like, oh, you can't say that. Blah, blah, blah. So they have like this problem with words. Blasphemy. The more negative you are, the more likely you are to be a communist. The more negative you are, the more likely you are to be a Christian. You know what I mean? Like one of those crazy Christian parents that are like obsessed with sin and, oh, you can't do this and blah, 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 and they're just more control freaky. The less control freaky you are, the less of a Christian or a communist you will be. Both these thought systems, which is what they are, involve collectivism. Okay? Help the poor. You know what I mean? And that's a Christian idea coming from Jesus and stuff like that. Help the poor. And communists have the same thing. Help the poor. You know what I mean? Instead of just letting people be and letting people survive. And I don't believe in helping the poor. I believe in just living and looking after yourself and stuff like that. I don't want to give money to a homeless person. Like, unless they're actually doing something, they shouldn't deserve it. Do you see what I mean? Whereas Christians are more likely to open up a soup kitchen and help the poor. Communists are more likely to come up with some government program to help the poor. Very similar. You have to look at the whole, like, let's say the Catholic Church. The Roman Empire morphed into the Catholic Church and continued as the Catholic Church. So you have to look at the church. What is it? It's a governmental system. It's a control system, right? So just because one thing's called a religion, one thing's called a government, one thing's called Christianity, one thing's called communism, don't think that they're different. They're both still political systems and control systems. Okay, both are anti-spiritual. For example, in Christianity, you're not going to get much talk about psychic ability. You're not going to get much talk about trying to investigate deeper realms of things. Where you get that is when you get involved with psychics, cults, unusual groups, unusual things, different experiences. What does the Christian do? They live a suburban life, they go to church, they don't look in that direction because that's all the devil and that's all paganism, that's all evil. No, psychic abilities, no, and they avoid all that. And they just go to church and they take their communion and they live these simple lives and they're not investigating deeper stuff. Now, here's the big thing. Here's one of the biggest points. What the fuck do communists do? Communists are materialistic. Communists are atheists. What do? They don't go down that material side. They don't go into all those spiritual things, all those funky things. Right? They don't. So essentially, although in one house in the suburbs you'll have a communist, in another house you'll have a Christian, they're next door to each other. One's got pictures of Jesus on their wall, the other one's got a picture of Che Guevara or whatever on their wall, and red flags and Black Lives Matter shit. Those two houses are still being good little materialistic beings. They're still not investigating deeper realms. They're not finding out about aliens. They're not finding out about deeper stuff. They're both dumbed down earthlings. Sauron. That's what Sauron wants. That's what the infiltrators want, to control them and have them as materialistic beings. And that's what Hubbard's saying in this briefing. He's saying this materialistic mind, this DNA, the implant that's changing their DNA, that's making them being controlled by Sauron and not being aware of higher consciousness, and not being aware of higher things. That's what he's saying is going on. And he's talking about Christianity, and he's talking about communism. Although he doesn't even mention in the briefing communist or leftist in the briefing, but he's talking about that materialistic mindset, because they're both the same. Do you see it? Do you see how they're both behaving the same? They're both here on earth, not trying to leave their bodies, not trying to get psychic abilities, railing against them actually. Anyway. See, they're achieving the same goal for the enemy. They're achieving the same goal for the enemy, but they're just going about it in different ways with Christianity and communism. Christianity and communism were both, already mentioned this, started by the same and have higher, were both started by the same race. Basically, that race I was telling you that had a higher amount of communist DNA. Okay? I don't know if you're aware of the actual origins of Christianity, but it came from a certain race, and they came into Greece and Rome and stuff like that, and they were all the first Christians. And then it got more and more popular, took over more and more minds, and then Rome adopted it, and also rotted away at the Roman Empire, because the Roman Empire was about religious freedom. That's why it was popular. I mentioned that in another briefing. It helped bring about, it fucked up the Roman Empire. That's why people liked Rome. Anyway, this foreign influence came in from the Middle East, and eventually the Roman Empire adopted it, and then it really hit the masses, and then it spread out of that racial group and became very much, Europeans became Christians, and it brought about dark ages for 1,000 years. But I do find it interesting, isn't it, that it both came out of that racial group, communism in the Russian Revolution. And well, even before the Russian Revolution, there were communists in London, communist bankers in London, and they helped bring about the Russian Revolution, and they helped. It took them a very long time to try and infiltrate the West, but bits and pieces, they kept on implementing communism in the West. And that's why America and England have been secretly communist for a long time, because these freaking bankers, and they're of a certain racial type as well. And you might go, what are you talking about, Andy? All I'm saying to you is, you go into a bank, you go into the meetings with high-level managers, and you see what race you see in those higher levels. And you'll find there's a higher percentage of this race in those higher levels. Why? I suggest they've got the DNA. They've got the bad DNA that is being controlled by Sauron. That's a possibility. I'm not saying I totally agree with this theory, but I'm just saying it makes sense, doesn't it? God's chosen people. What does God's chosen people mean? You work it out. But again, I'm not saying pick on any of them. I mean, they've interbred anyway. They've heavily interbred, and too many white people's Europeans' DNA has been messed up, and too many of them are leftists as well. So it's just ridiculous. But anyway, you look into it. The materials is there. I'm just helping you go on your adventure of finding out if you're interested in these things, right? And I just hate not saying facts and data, which is what the communists want. Anyway, isn't it interesting that both those things, communism and Christianity, came from a certain gene pool? I think that's interesting, because I think in that gene pool they had a higher percentage of this implant and this mind control. And another thing, why do they have higher IQs? You think about that one. Why? Why do they have higher IQs? Which they do. Now, that's not a huge compliment. Like, you want to have a high IQ, but you also want to have other abilities. So if you've got a high IQ, but you've got other personality traits that are not that good, it doesn't mean that you're automatically better. You know what I mean? It's like, for example, it's just interesting when you, like, I had a tour guide once that was of this race, and he was just smarter than other Mexicans. And I noticed it, and I thought, oh, that's interesting. And then eventually ended up talking to someone, and I overheard something, and I'm like, oh yeah, he's one of them. And I thought, isn't that interesting? Why are they always freaking smart? What's going on? You know, why are they smarter? Where are they getting this from? Where? You know? So anyway, is it alien DNA? You know what I mean? I think so. And I think a lot of them are proud of it. And if you actually talk to them, a lot of them, if you talk to a lot of these top communists and stuff, they'll be proud of what they've achieved in their race and stuff like that. And they're like, yeah, we're more sophisticated, and we don't have these freedom societies are just barbaric and uncontrolled, and they're crazy, and you know, we've been introducing these socialistic policies that are more refined and advanced and scientific, and we're proud that so many of our people are famous artists and successful people and businessmen, and that they will tell you if you had a private conversation. I mean, they would never say it to you, but if you somehow overheard them or something, they would admit to all the things that I'm sort of saying here. And all I'm saying is that a lot of them support this socialist fucking crap. Fuck you, socialism, it's shit. Socialism's bad, stay away from it. Now, I've got to finish these points, and I'm going to have to finish this briefing, and I'm going to have to go into another one. I should be able to finish it all up in the next one. Both contain hypocrites. This is a big thing you notice about the passionate Christian and the passionate communist. Very hypocritical people. If you look into their lives, the communists are more hypocritical than the Christians. I mean, communists are just on a level of just what the fuck in their messed upness. Very hypocritical people. You know, like they'll rail about global warming, and then the next minute they'll get on a jet or something like that when it's not necessary to get on a jet. It's just so, they're just classic hypocrites. Or they'll criticize someone for being mean and taking someone's money, and then they'll just go and do that themselves. And you'll notice with the Christians as well, they'll be classic hypocrites. They'll be obsessed with sex or something like that. Like, they'll have a go at other people sexually, or like, so that person did something bad sexually, blah, 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 and then you find out that they're the person who's bad sexually. And it's just, there's a hypocritical thing you'll notice amongst Christians. See, there's heaps of points connecting them. Christianity attempted an earth takeover with their religion and you know, going in and stuff like that and taking over the world. And communism attempted an earth takeover as well. So they're both into taking over the earth, which I find interesting. Now, both involve raising up the weak. There's some sort of obsession, I think I already mentioned this, with helping the weak or raising up the weak, you know, in communism and in Christianity. And I think weak people see strength in Christianity, so they join that because they're not strong enough to handle living by themselves. Christianity gives them strength in the same way that communism gives them strength. Like, yeah, we can come together and blah, blah, blah. And both assume that man is bad. See, communism assumes man is just bad, and that's why you need to have the big government and the police state, and you can't let them just be capitalists because they're going to end up exploiting people and being bad. Christians as well believe that man is just bad. He's just born in sin, and he's just bad, and you need to turn to church in order to get yourself set free from that sin. They believe that man is natively bad, both of them. There's so many similarities between Christianity and communism. Am I convincing you? All right. Nutty countries are more communist or Christian. If you look around the world, you'll see the more nutty a country goes, the more communist they go, or the more Christian they go, like obsessed with Christianity. And also, you might be, again, thinking of those nice middle Americans who are Christian. That's more cultural Christianity. They're not really Christians. They fucking well kill people. They invade countries and shit. They're tough. If someone tries to come on their territory, they rip out a gun and go, hey, back. They're not Christian. They just think that they're Christian. They've got the trappings of Christianity. You know, the clothes, they like to say this and that. But they're not really proper believing Christians, you know. And if you look at the founding of America, it was founded by the Illuminati. And it had a huge Freemasonry network. And Freemasons aren't Christians. The higher up the Freemasonry you go, you find out more and you learn more about the bullshit of Christianity. And you can't advance to the higher levels unless you reject Christianity. So America's run by the Freemasons. It's run by the Illuminati. It always has been since the start. America is not a Christian country. Okay, you just got the middle average people who in the suburbs who are running businesses and, you know, go to church on a Sunday, and they're not really Christian. I tell you what, if America was a Christian country, as soon as the war was announced, no guy would go into the war if they were a Christian country. Because thou shalt not murder. So, you see what I mean? Here's a really funny point. At the top of these two groups, Christianity and communism, if you look at the people right at the top, they don't even really believe in those philosophies. So I bet you go to the top of the Catholic Church and the top of the churches and stuff, those people don't even really believe in it. I think they know it's bullshit. If you go to the top of communism, you'll find capitalists that don't even really believe in communism, but they're just using it in order to achieve a goal. What's that goal? Is that control? The same as Christianity. People at the top don't really believe in Christianity, but they're using it to advance themselves, to give themselves a nice living, and to achieve, I guess, control over people and power and stuff. So they're the many points that I'm trying to say. I've said now, they're all the points. Things are really deep. You've got to look down the rabbit hole, and you've got to see how, yes, that car is red in a four-wheel drive. That car is small and it's colored blue. They looked so different, but at the end of the day, people jump in them and it takes them from A to B. Those cars are the same, and that's what's Christianity and communism. So that's basically the idea I'm trying to get across here. I think Hubbard's trying to communicate this. It's all about control. It's all about infiltration of Earth by the Markabs and these interdimensional beings that are controlling the Markabs, and they're coming here and trying to infiltrate and take over, and they're trying to shut down man's awareness. And this is the biggest point I would say about the connection between Christianity and communism. They both shut down awareness. That's the most important thing. Because that's what these interdimensional beings want, because they want us as aware as a cow, because a cow allows the paddock to get taken over because there's no idea what's going on. It's just a freaking cow. That's what they're aiming to make us into, cows. And the implant apparently is making us into cows. That's what's going on, right? And that's what Hubbard's trying to communicate in this briefing. Sauron's trying to take over Middle Earth, okay? And when you're looking on to Earth, what do you see what was Hubbard seeing in the 80s? He was seeing the Christians, and he was seeing all these people who are mind controlled by Christianity, and then he was seeing all these people mind controlled with communism, and communism increasing more and more and more. And it absolutely has taken over from Christianity, by the way, communism. That tactic has taken over, but give it 200 years and it might flip, and communism might go away and Christianity might raise up. But at the end of the day, the earth is still controlled. People are still being thought controlled and made into cows. So how do you break free of that? It's freedom, and apparently you do the OT8 auditing and it unlocks your mind, and that's what goes on. But that's it for this briefing. I hope you liked it. I hope I made you start to see Hubbard's viewpoint in his opinion towards Christianity. This is why he saw Christianity as dangerous, because it lowers awareness. And this is why he also didn't like communism, because it also appears that he was an intelligence agent working for America to take over the world. And America did take over the world, and it probably was a good thing, because Russia would have taken over the world, and America wasn't as police statey as Russia. And now what do we see? America's turned more and more communist, so it's less popular, it's less taking over the world, and China and Russia are raising up because they're more and more freedom now, and they're less communist. And people in America and people like me are saying, no, good on Russia. You know, I want Russia to take Ukraine. That's good. It's good. It's better than freaking all the corrupt system we had. So these sides switch who's taking over and stuff. Anyway, that's it for this briefing. There's still more that I've got to say on OT8, but I think maybe you're starting to see the ideas that Hubbard's trying to talk about. So I've been your host, Andy Nolch. You've been listening to the Indie Scientology podcast. So remember, what you thought was impossible, like what I just said, this whole thing about Christianity and communism, thought it was impossible, it is possible. Oh, and one other point I want to say, it's like you can have a war where you've got two guys fighting and you think that they're extremely opposed to each other, because you got, in a pub, for example, two drunk guys fighting each other, and you think they're extremely opposed. But at the end of the day, they're not. They're both on the same page. They both agree in physical violence to achieve their ends. You got a war. You got one side fighting the other side, and you think, oh, they're so different. They're completely different belief systems. They're totally against each other. Look at them, they're fighting. They're the absolute opposite. And you got a little dude there. You got Andy sitting there watching the war. Andy's the one that's actually different to these two. Andy's the one that's different to the two people fighting in a pub. He's the one who's really different. And those two people who are fighting are actually in agreement in a lot of things. They both agree they need to fight to achieve their ends. And they both agree they need to pull out their fists. They both agree they need to pull out guns and shoot each other. They both agree they need to send tanks. You'll see it in Ukraine. You'll see England sending tanks, and they'll make out, oh, we're against Russia. Russia's so bad, blah, blah, blah. Oh, but here's more tanks and here's more bombs and shit. Take that. Take the bombs and tanks, Ukraine. And it's like, hold on a second. You're criticizing Russia for using bombs and tanks and all this stuff. You're on the same page as Russia. You both believe in physical violence, and it's the person who's outside that's the person who's really different. Just like communism and Christianity, they're like the two people fighting each other. They appear to be so different, but actually they're quite connected and quite alike to each other. And it's actually the person who's outside that, who lives totally different. They're the ones who are actually really opposed and against that. So I hope that helps you understand it. I wonder if there's other things in your life that physically appear to be completely opposite, but they're actually the same. So anyway, maybe you should look for them. See ya.